Feral Omega raised wolf pups in the forest. One night the savage Alpha King came to claim them. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's get back to our main character. Lily Arden had lived a life of isolation, surrounded by nothing but the towering trees and the howls of the wild. A feral Omega, she had never known the touch of another soul, aside from the occasional contact with the wolves she had raised as her own. Her world was simple. It was her, the wolves, and the forest. Lily was known to the surrounding packs, but not as a member of their society. No, she was seen as something different, someone to be avoided, whispered about. Her lack of scent, the very thing that should have connected her to an alpha, was her curse. She was an Omega without the very essence that made her whole. Despite her unusual condition, Lily thrived in her own way, caring for the wolf pups she had raised from birth. They were her children, and in a way, they were the only family she had ever known. Every day, she would wander deeper into the forest with them, teaching them the ways of survival, until the day the savage Alpha King came. It was a crisp autumn evening when the earth trembled beneath Lily's feet, signaling the arrival of someone powerful. At first, she thought it was another pack attempting to claim what little territory she had managed to carve out in this vast wilderness. But this was different. The ground shook with an unfamiliar power, one that was impossible to ignore. Lily stood at the edge of her small camp, the firelight flickering in her eyes as she watched the shadows stretch across the forest floor. She had lived her life without fear, but there was something about this presence that made her heart race in her chest. It wasn't the sound of footsteps that alerted her, it was the silence that followed. She could feel it in her bones. He was near. The Alpha King, Marcus Nightshade, had come to claim her. His reputation preceded him, a king with eyes as cold as winter, a ruler who was as feared as he was admired. Lily had heard the stories, of course, but she never imagined she would be standing in his path. As Marcus stepped into the clearing, the night seemed to hold its breath. His silver eyes locked onto Lily's, and for the first time in her life, she felt something stir within her. It wasn't fear. No, it was something else, something wild, something uncontrollable. She had heard of the bond between an Alpha and an Omega, but she never thought it would happen to her. Not a wolfless Omega like herself. Yet here he was, and he wasn't just a king. He was her mate. Lily had spent her entire life running from the expectations of others, but now, faced with the Alpha King who had come to claim her, she had nowhere to run. She felt it deep in her chest, a pull, a connection she couldn't deny. Her life was about to change forever, and it wasn't just because the Alpha King had come, it was because he had come for her. Ivy sat at the edge of the small campfire, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of herbal tea. The quiet of the forest surrounded her, but there was an unsettling stillness in the air, as though the trees themselves were holding their breath. The fire crackled, sending sparks into the dark sky, but Ivy barely noticed. Her mind was miles away, on the tall figure who had stepped into her life just hours before. The Alpha King, Marcus Nightshade, had come to her, and with him, a power that pulsed in the air, thick and undeniable. She could feel it in the pit of her stomach, a tug that was both strange and familiar, like the pull of gravity itself. Marcus had come for her. The thought was almost impossible to process. After all these years of living in the shadows, hidden away in the forest, she was now the center of someone's attention, and not just anyone, but a king. A powerful alpha, a force that no one dared challenge. Ivy had heard the whispers. About him, of course. The stories of his cold heart and ruthless reign. The way he had taken the throne at a young age, murdering his own father in a battle for supremacy. But those stories hadn't prepared her for the man who had stood before her, eyes glowing with a power she couldn't comprehend. As the silence stretched on, she could still feel his gaze on her. It was as though he had stripped away every layer of her being, leaving her bare and exposed. But despite that, there was no fear. Only a deep, inexplicable connection. She had been alone for so long, living in the woods with only the wolves for company. The pups she had raised from the moment they were born had been her family. Her heart had no room for anything else, no space for anyone to fill the void she had carved in her soul. But now, in the presence of Marcus, that void felt different, like it was calling out to him, and he to her. She wasn't sure what it meant, but she felt it with every fiber of her being. "You must be wondering why I'm here." Marcus's voice cut through the silence, low and commanding. It had a warmth to it that Ivy hadn't expected, a surprising softness that made her heart flutter. She glanced up at him, meeting his piercing silver gaze, and found herself unable to speak for a moment. There was too much to say, too many questions spinning in her mind. He stepped closer, his every movement deliberate, calculated. Ivy could feel the heat radiating from him, even from the distance between them. "I've come to claim what's mine," he continued, his voice steady, though there was an intensity in his words that made her pulse quicken. "You're not just some stray omega living in the woods. You're the one I've been searching for." His words hung in the air like a spell, and Ivy's heart raced. She wanted to pull away, to deny what he was saying, but her body refused to move. Instead, she found herself stepping forward, toward him. It was as though her body knew something her mind hadn't yet caught up with. Marcus reached out, his hand brushing against her cheek in a touch so gentle it felt like the wind itself. Ivy shivered at the contact, her skin tingling. Where his fingers had been, it was impossible to ignore the pull between them now. She couldn't deny it, not even if she wanted to. This man, this Alpha King, was more than just a king. He was a force of nature, and somehow, he had found her. Ivy had always believed she was meant to be alone, that her life would always be one of solitude. But now, with Marcus standing before her, she wasn't so sure anymore. The question lingered in her mind, unspoken but heavy with meaning. Was this fate? Was he truly meant to be the one to claim her, to change everything she had ever known? "Come with me," Marcus said softly, his voice almost a whisper now. "I'll show you a world you've never dreamed of." His invitation hung in the air, and for the first time in her life, Ivy didn't hesitate. She knew that stepping into the unknown with him was the only path forward. And so, without a second thought, she took his hand. Ivy felt the wind shift as Marcus led her deeper into the forest. The trees around them were ancient, towering over them like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches reaching for the heavens. Despite the darkness, the moonlight filtered through the canopy, casting a silver glow on the forest floor. She had never been this far from her home, never ventured into the heart of the woods where the ancient magic of the land seemed to hum beneath the surface. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching, waiting. Every step she took with Marcus felt heavier, more significant, as if she was crossing an invisible threshold into a new life. She glanced up at him, his tall figure moving gracefully through the trees, and for a brief moment, Ivy wondered if she had made the right choice. She had always lived alone, surrounded by the wolves she had raised, but now she was walking beside a king, a man whose presence commanded not only the land but the very air around him. "Do you feel it?" Marcus's voice broke the silence, soft yet strong. "The pull between us." Ivy nodded, though her throat felt tight. She had felt it from the moment their hands had touched, a connection so deep and undeniable that it sent a thrill of both fear and excitement racing through her. It wasn't just physical. It was something far more profound, something that bound them together in ways she couldn't yet understand. "I don't know what this is," Ivy admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't deny it." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her, his silver eyes gleaming in the moonlight. For a moment, he said nothing, his gaze searching hers with an intensity that made Ivy's heart skip a beat. Then, he spoke, his voice low, almost reverent. "You are the one I've been searching for, Ivy. My mate. My Luna." The words hung in the air, heavy and full of meaning. Ivy's breath caught in her throat, her chest tightening at the weight of what he was saying. She had heard stories of the bond between an alpha and his mate, the unbreakable connection that bound them for life. But she had never imagined it would be like this. She had never imagined it would be him. "The Alpha King. I don't belong in your world," Ivy said softly, her voice trembling with uncertainty. "I've never been part of the pack, and I don't know how to be what you want." Marcus stepped closer, his presence enveloping her. "You don't have to be anything you're not. You're already everything I need." His words were like a balm to her wounded soul, and for the first time, Ivy allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have a place in this world, by his side. The connection between them was undeniable, but the fear of stepping into a world so foreign to her still lingered. "What happens now?" Ivy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus reached out and gently cupped her face in his hand, his touch surprisingly tender. "Now we go to my kingdom. We begin our life together, Ivy. And together, we will rule." Ivy felt the weight of his words settle over her like a warm blanket, comforting and secure. She had no idea what the future held, but in this moment, with Marcus standing before her, she knew one thing for certain. Her life would never be the same. She was no longer just the feral omega of the forest. She was his Luna, and that thought filled her with a sense of purpose she had never known before. Ivy stood at the edge of the clearing, her heart pounding in her chest as she looked at the towering stone walls of Marcus's kingdom. The night sky stretched above them, filled with stars, and the moon cast its pale light over the vast expanse of land. It was a world so different from the one she had known in the forest, a world of power, history, and responsibility. Marcus had led her here, to the heart of his realm, and though the beauty of the place was undeniable, Ivy could not shake the feeling of being an outsider. The gates of the kingdom were guarded by fierce wolves, their eyes glowing in the moonlight, and the air seemed charged with a palpable energy. This was no ordinary land. It was a kingdom forged in strength, and now it was hers to navigate. Marcus stood beside her, his presence unwavering. "Do not be afraid," he said, his voice calm and steady. "You are not alone. I will be with you every step of the way." Ivy glanced at him, her heart swelling with emotions she could not yet name. He was the Alpha King, a man who commanded the respect of all who crossed his path, but to her, he was something more. He was the man who had claimed her, the man who had made her his Luna. "I'm not afraid," Ivy whispered, though the uncertainty in her heart still lingered. "It's just so different here." Marcus smiled softly, his silver eyes warm in the moonlight. "This is where we will build our future, Ivy. Together." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that Ivy could not ignore. She had spent so long hiding in the shadows, tending to the wolves, avoiding the world of power and politics. But now, in this moment, she was at the center of it all. She was the Luna of a kingdom, a role she had never imagined for herself. As they walked through the gates, Ivy was struck by the grandeur of the palace that loomed ahead. The stone walls were carved with intricate symbols, and the large wooden doors stood tall, guarded by soldiers who saluted as Marcus passed. Everything here was designed to command respect, to remind everyone of the Alpha King's power. "This is our home now," Marcus said, his voice low as they entered the grand hall. The space was vast, with high ceilings and tall windows that let in the soft glow of the moon. Tapestries hung from the walls, depicting battles, victories, and the history of the kingdom. Ivy felt small in the grandness of it all, but as she walked beside Marcus, she began to feel a sense of belonging, something she hadn't felt in years. The hall was filled with courtiers, all bowing their heads as Marcus entered. Ivy could feel their eyes on her, a mixture of curiosity and respect. She was not just an Omega anymore. She was the Luna of the Alpha King. Marcus led her to a grand throne, placed at the center of the hall. He gestured for her to sit beside him. "This is where we will reign," he said, his voice filled with a quiet authority. Ivy hesitated for a moment before sitting beside him. As she did, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. This was her place now. She was no longer just a feral Omega in the woods. She was part of something much greater. The weight of the throne was heavy, but it was a weight she was beginning to understand. It was her responsibility now, as much as it was Marcus's. "We will face challenges, Ivy," Marcus said, his voice low. "But together, we can overcome them." Ivy nodded, her heart steadying. She was ready for whatever came next. She had found her place here, by his side, and nothing would tear them apart. Together, they would rule. Ivy stood at the edge of the balcony, gazing out over the kingdom. The night had settled in, and the moon cast its gentle light over the land, painting everything in soft silver. From this height, she could see the sprawling forests, the distant mountains, and the vastness of Marcus's realm. It was a beautiful sight, but it was also overwhelming. She had never imagined this life for herself, never thought she would be standing here as Luna of the Alpha King. The weight of her new position pressed down on her, but as she looked over her shoulder, she saw Marcus approaching. His presence was as commanding as ever, but there was something softer in his gaze when it met hers. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, his voice low, almost soothing. "But you don't have to face it alone." Ivy turned to face him, her heart swelling with the unspoken bond they had shared since that first moment in the forest. He had been her strength when she needed it, and now she would be his. "I never imagined this life," she admitted, her voice barely a whisper. "I've spent so long hiding away, and now I'm here, in the heart of everything. It's overwhelming." Marcus stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "You're here because you belong here, Ivy. This is where you were always meant to be." His words were reassuring, and Ivy felt a warmth spread through her chest. She had spent so much time in the wilderness, isolated and alone, that she had forgotten what it was like to feel truly seen. But with Marcus, she felt it. She felt like she mattered. "I want to be here," Ivy said, her voice stronger now. "I want to help you, to be by your side. We can face whatever comes, together." Marcus smiled, his silver eyes shining with something deep, something unspoken. "Together," he repeated, his voice firm. "There is no one else I would want at my side." The next few days were a whirlwind of activity as Ivy adjusted to life in the kingdom. She had been introduced to the court, met the important figures in Marcus's realm, and learned the customs and responsibilities of being Luna. It was a world of politics, strategy, and diplomacy, things she had never had to deal with in the forest. But Marcus was there, guiding her, supporting her every step of the way. Slowly, she began to find her place, understanding the delicate balance that came with being the Luna of such a powerful king. It was not just about strength, it was about compassion, about earning the respect of the pack through wisdom and kindness. The more Ivy learned, the more she realized that being Luna was not just about standing by Marcus's side. It was about being a leader in her own right, about helping the pack thrive and grow. One evening, as they stood together overlooking the kingdom, Marcus turned to Ivy with a thoughtful expression. "You're starting to understand it, aren't you?" he asked. "The weight of leadership." Ivy nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I am. It's a lot more than I thought, but I'm ready. I will do whatever it takes to help you, to help us." Marcus's expression softened, and he placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "I know you will, and that's why I chose you. You're stronger than you realize, Ivy." For the first time since coming to the kingdom, Ivy felt a deep sense of peace settle within her. She was no longer just a lost Omega in the wilderness. She was Luna, and she was ready to embrace her new life, whatever challenges it might bring. Together, she and Marcus would face the future. Together, they would build a legacy, and she was ready to begin. Ivy stood in the grand hall, her hands nervously smoothing the fabric of her gown. The weight of the upcoming council meeting pressed heavily on her shoulders, but she had learned quickly in her new role as Luna. The decisions made in this room would affect not only the pack, but the entire kingdom. She took a deep breath and glanced over at Marcus, who stood beside her with his usual confidence. His presence was steadying, but today, it was clear that the gravity of the situation had not escaped him. His silver eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, the world outside the walls of the palace seemed to fade away. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, his voice low but steady. Ivy nodded, though her heart was pounding in her chest. "I'm ready," she said, more to herself than to him. As the doors to the council room opened, Ivy felt a wave of anticipation and anxiety wash over her. She followed Marcus into the room, where the pack leaders and key advisors of the kingdom had already gathered. The air was thick with tension, and Ivy could feel the weight of their gazes upon her. Some were curious, others uncertain, but none were dismissive. She was the Luna now, and whether she was fully ready for it or not, her voice mattered. As Marcus took his seat at the head of the table, Ivy moved to the seat beside him, her eyes scanning the room. The council was made up of powerful individuals, each one with their own influence and ambitions. It was not just about ruling with strength. It was about navigating the delicate web of politics, alliances, and rivalries. Ivy knew that she had much to learn, but she also knew that she couldn't afford to stay silent. The meeting began, with Marcus speaking first, outlining the issues that were on the table. Trade agreements with neighboring kingdoms, defense strategies, and the welfare of the pack were all topics of concern. Ivy listened intently, absorbing everything. Her heart raced, but she kept her composure, leaning in to listen carefully as each council member spoke. She wasn't just here to observe. She was here to be a part of the decision-making process. As the discussion moved to a particularly sensitive issue, a proposed alliance with a distant pack, Ivy found her voice. "I believe we need to be cautious about this alliance," Ivy said, her voice calm but firm. "We don't know enough about their intentions, and rushing into this could lead to problems down the line." There was a brief silence in the room, and Ivy could feel the eyes of the council members on her. Some looked surprised, others curious. Marcus turned to her, a hint of pride in his gaze. "I agree with Luna, Ivy," he said, his voice carrying the weight of authority. "We will not act until we have more information." Ivy's heart swelled at his words, the first real validation she had felt since assuming her role. The discussion continued, but Ivy's confidence grew with every word she spoke. She had once been the outsider, the Omega hiding in the shadows, but now, she was a voice in this room. Her words mattered. As the meeting drew to a close, Marcus turned to her with a small smile. "You did well today," he said, his hand brushing hers under the table. Ivy smiled back, feeling a sense of pride settle in her chest. She had taken the first step toward finding her place in this world, a place beside Marcus, a place where she was more than just a bystander. She was his partner, his equal. The road ahead was uncertain, filled with challenges and obstacles, but Ivy knew one thing for sure. She was no longer just the feral Omega. She was Luna, and together with Marcus, they would shape the future of this kingdom. Ivy stood in the garden of the palace, the soft scent of blooming flowers filling the air as she gazed out at the sprawling landscape. It had been several weeks since the council meeting, and the weight of her new role had begun to settle into her bones. She had learned much in such a short time, but there was still so much more to understand. The palace was beautiful, its stone walls lined with ivy and the gardens vibrant with color, yet Ivy still felt like a stranger here at times. Despite the warmth of Marcus's presence, despite the bond they shared, she often found herself retreating into solitude, needing time to process everything that had changed. She heard footsteps approaching and turned to see Marcus walking toward her, his tall figure cutting through the sunlight. His silver eyes met hers, and the tension in her chest eased. "You're deep in thought," he said, his voice soft yet strong. Ivy smiled faintly, crossing her arms over her chest. "I suppose I am. There's so much to consider. I never imagined that being Luna would be so much more than just standing beside you. There are so many decisions to make, so many lives that depend on us." Marcus came to stand beside her, his presence a reassuring anchor. "It's not just the strength of the alpha that matters," he said quietly. "It's the heart of the Luna that shapes the pack. You've already proven that, Ivy. Your wisdom, your compassion, it's what will make us strong." His words were a balm to her restless heart, and for a moment, Ivy allowed herself to simply stand there, taking in the peace that surrounded them. "I want to do everything I can to help," Ivy said softly, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "But sometimes I feel like I'm still figuring out how." Marcus placed a hand gently on her shoulder, his touch warm and grounding. "You don't have to have all the answers right away. Just be yourself. That's all the kingdom needs." Ivy looked up at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Marcus had always been a steady force in her life, someone she could rely on, but hearing those words from him, words that acknowledged her strength, her worth, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't known she needed. "Thank you," she whispered. "I needed to hear that." Marcus smiled and nodded, his eyes twinkling with understanding. "I know, and you're doing more than you realize." As they stood there, side by side, Ivy couldn't help but feel the quiet certainty in her heart. This was her life now, and although there would be challenges, she wasn't facing them alone. Marcus was by her side, and together, they would navigate this new world. The sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows over the garden, but Ivy didn't feel the same sense of unease that she had when she first arrived. The kingdom was no longer a foreign place. It was home, and it was a home that she would help build, with Marcus, and with the pack they were destined to lead. "Come," Marcus said, his voice drawing her attention. "The council will convene again soon." We need to prepare for the decisions ahead. Ivy nodded, her heart steady and sure. I'm ready, she said. And for the first time, she truly believed it. Ivy stood in the grand hall once again, the weight of the council meeting ahead pressing heavily on her shoulders. Over the past few weeks, she had become more accustomed to the flow of palace life, but each new challenge felt like another test. Marcus stood beside her, his presence as strong and steady as ever. But today, there was a different energy in the air. The discussions had grown more complex, the stakes higher. Today, the future of their kingdom rested in their hands. You've grown so much since you first arrived here, Marcus said softly, his voice a steadying force. Ivy glanced at him, meeting his silver eyes, and for a moment, the rest of the world seemed to fade away. I've learned from the best, Ivy replied, offering a small smile. Marcus smiled back, a flash of pride in his gaze. And you've brought something to this kingdom that it desperately needed, your wisdom and heart. Ivy's heart swelled at his words. She had come so far, from the girl who had hidden in the forest with the wolves, to the Luna of the Alpha King's court. But the path ahead was still uncertain. As the council convened, Ivy could feel the weight of the pack's future in the air. She took her seat beside Marcus at the table, her back straight, her mind focused. The room was filled with the pack's leaders, each one waiting for her to speak. It was a role she was still growing into, but today, she knew she was ready. The discussions began, with trade agreements and alliances being debated. But the real challenge came when the topic of the neighboring pack arose. A rival pack had been encroaching on their territory, and it was clear that something had to be done. The room was filled with murmurs of disagreement, some members wanting to take immediate action, while others suggested diplomacy. Ivy listened closely, her mind turning over the options. Finally, she spoke. We cannot rush into battle without understanding the full scope of the situation, Ivy said, her voice calm but firm. We must consider the long-term consequences of our actions, both for our pack and for the neighboring territories. Her words silenced the room, and all eyes turned to her. Marcus's gaze softened, a look of approval passing between them. Luna, Ivy speaks wisely, he said, his voice carrying authority. We will take the time to gather more information before making any decisions. Ivy felt a sense of pride and relief wash over her. It wasn't just Marcus's support she had, it was the pack's trust. She was no longer the outsider, the one who had been cast aside. She was their Luna. As the meeting continued, Ivy felt the shift in the room. The council members were no longer just respecting her position as Luna. They were listening to her ideas, valuing her insights. By the time the meeting adjourned, Ivy knew that the kingdom was in capable hands. Not just Marcus's hands, but hers as well. As they left the council room, Marcus turned to her with a smile. You did well today. Ivy nodded, her heart light with gratitude. We did well today. The future of the kingdom was still uncertain, but for the first time, Ivy felt a deep sense of belonging. She was not just a Luna by title, she was a leader, shaping the future of the pack alongside Marcus. And together, they would face whatever challenges lay ahead. Ivy stood in the gardens of the palace, watching the sun set over the kingdom. The orange and purple hues of the sky painted the landscape in a soft, ethereal light, casting long shadows over the land. It had been a few months since she had fully embraced her role as Luna, and with each passing day, she felt more at home. The palace, once a daunting place, had become familiar. The people, once distant, were now allies, friends. Marcus had always been by her side, guiding her through every decision, every challenge. But it was no longer just his strength that fueled her. It was her own. Ivy had learned that leadership was not about power or control. It was about understanding, compassion, and the ability to listen. She had seen it in Marcus, and she had begun to cultivate it in herself. Together, they had made decisions that shaped the future of the pack, always with a deep respect for the land and the people they ruled. As Ivy stood there, feeling the cool breeze against her skin, she reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once hidden in the forest, the woman who had been cast aside and forgotten, was now the heart of this kingdom. The wolves, the pack, and the people of the realm looked to her as much as they looked to Marcus. And with each day, her bond with him grew stronger. They were no longer just partners in leadership, they were partners in life. Their connection was deeper than anything Ivy had ever known. It wasn't just the bond of an alpha and his Luna. It was a bond of mutual respect, trust, and love. As Marcus approached her, his silver eyes soft and knowing, Ivy couldn't help but smile. He had been her rock, her guide, but he also gave her the space to grow, to find her own strength. "You've been quiet," Marcus said, his voice warm as he stood beside her, looking out over the kingdom. "Just thinking," Ivy replied, her voice calm. "About how far we've come." He smiled, his hand brushing hers. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" "Yes," Ivy said softly. "And we're just getting started." Marcus's gaze turned toward the horizon, and Ivy followed his eyes, seeing the kingdom they had built together, a kingdom that was strong, united, and thriving. "There will always be challenges," Marcus said, his voice thoughtful. "But with you by my side, I know we can face anything." Ivy nodded, feeling the truth of his words deep in her soul. The future was uncertain, yes, but together, they would face it. Together, they would continue to build, to grow, and to lead. "We've built something beautiful here," Ivy said, her voice filled with conviction. "And I know we'll keep building it, together." Marcus turned to her, his eyes filled with pride. "Together," he repeated. And in that moment, Ivy knew that no matter what the future held, she was exactly where she was meant to be, by his side, and nothing would change that.